This BizNews production is brought to you by Brenthurst Wealth. Building wealth and protecting legacies since 2004. Invest better with Brenthurst. Our next speaker is one of the most recognizable voices in South African economics. When Dawie Roodt talks, you know you're going to get an unvarnished, straight to the point analysis of the economy. He doesn't say like Neil used to say, "Ons gaan nou moer," but he is similarly unvarnished, and I'm sure he'll have some choice words for us as well today. You know him as an economist. You might not know he's also an adventurer. This is a man who has run the Comrades, completed an Ironman, and even has national colours for powered paragliding. Perhaps most remarkably, he competed in and won a national rally car event with a blind navigator. Consider that for a moment, navigating treacherous roads at high speed, relying entirely on precision, trust, and effective communication. It's the perfect metaphor for what Dawie does every day, guiding us through a complex and often unpredictable economic landscape. I asked Dawie to come to BNC 3. He was unable to make it. It was my mistake. I asked him too late. We had a budget panel, if you recall, those who were here, and we had it early in the morning. It was also a very late decision because there was so much drama going on in the time about the VAT increase, and Dawie was supposed to, well, we were trying to get Dawie down here. He had other commitments in Johannesburg, but I'm delighted that he's here with us today, and I can assure you he will be with us many more times into the future. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Baie dankie, Alec. This is the most difficult part, to get going. Maybe I can just share a personal philosophy of mine, and that is that I try to do stuff that I don't think I will be able to do, and every time I've surprised myself. Every time. 3 weeks or so ago, I came back from Kenya. We climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. It's not that difficult. So we climbed Kilimanjaro. And last time I climbed it, I thought, will it be possible to cycle down with the bicycle? And I can assure you it is possible, because that's what we've done. So we cycled down. It took me 6 days to get to the top, and it took me 1 hour, 22 minutes to come down to the bottom. It was amazing. It's really amazing. Okay, so the difficult part is to get going. And once I'm up and running, things work out okay. It makes me think, the other evening I was asked by a women's club. I'm scared of women. I was asked by a women's club to come and talk to them about stuff, about the economy. It was my time a little bit later in the evening, just after the wine tasting event. So it sounded like a chicken pen as I walked in there. And so I stood in front like this, and this is, like I've said, this is a difficult part, just to get going. So I asked them, so where should I start? And an elderly lady jumped up in front. She said, start with your shirt. Start with your shirt. So I'm not gonna start with my shirt. All right, but in the meantime, Magnus, I found out what is the best investment. I know what the best investment is, and it's called a Birkin. The house of Hermes, the fashion house of Hermes, they've got a little handbag called a Birkin, and it will set you back about $450,000 for a handbag. That's the best investment. That's according to my wife. She reckons that's the best investment. And I was thinking about this, about why is this the best investment? What does it tell us? Why is a Birkin $450,000 for that specific one? Why is it so expensive? And then I realized it is about the price. Prices tell us just about everything that you want to know in an economy. And a Birkin, and by the way, it's not a very fancy handbag. It's a relatively small handbag. It's not very flashy like many of the other handbags. But having a Birkin tells a story, and it tells you that I'm rich. And you're not only saying that you are rich, you are saying I'm rich to other rich people. And really, there's a lot of economic research that can actually prove this. If you look, for example, at another luxury brand, like, for example, a Mercedes, The more cheaper models of Mercedes, the badges are a little bit bigger. Really? Because you want to say to other normal people that I'm pretending to be rich. So it's big. You want to just show it off a little bit. But once you become rich and you're better off financially, then, you've gone through the mall, you understand all these symbols and things, and then you can start seeing the symbols, and your symbols do not need to be very big. And that's why the more expensive models of Mercedes, the symbols are a little bit smaller. Because you're already rich, and rich people can sort of identify other rich people. So the price is important here, and the symboling behind the price, that's so important. Prices also tell all sorts of other things. Communists hate prices. Communists, in fact, what they did, and this is really the case, they fixed it in the Soviet Union, they fixed all prices. All prices in the economy were fixed at a certain level. Bread and milk and cheese, everything right across the Soviet Union was fixed at a certain level. And very cheap. So everything was very cheap. You just couldn't get it. But it was very, very cheap. That's really the case. If you talk about the communist system, there are always shortages. There are some other issues as well, sometimes surpluses, but there are always shortages. So the communists hate prices that change because they like to organize stuff. They want to set everything in the economy. They want to take all the decisions. So prices are fixed in the Soviet. And a free market system, prices do this all the time. And they keep on telling and giving you signals. Buy more, produce less, kind of stuff. And so that's why it's so important for prices to go up and down, because without it, we can't see the signals. And you don't know if somebody is rich, because you want to know if somebody is rich. Talking about prices, now I just had a look at prices, and you will find that for the last couple of years, well, in fact, for forever, prices, and we've never had it this good, by the way. We are living in the best times ever. Prices have been coming down, and not only have prices been coming down, prices collapsed it continued to collapse. Let me give you one number. One of the reasons why women like to wear diamonds is because they want to show everybody, I'm rich. Look at my fancy diamond. Diamonds are very expensive. The problem with diamonds nowadays is that diamonds are not expensive anymore. And the price for a 1 carat diamond, currently, the floor price for a diamond in China, because they manufacture them nowadays, and it's the same thing, by the way, they manufacture them, is between $10 and $15 a carat. That's the price of diamonds. Now, if you look through various other prices, you will see, for example, certain prices came down, and you have to adjust prices for all sorts of things. You have to adjust prices for the effect of inflation, get the real prices. Then you have to adjust prices for what you actually get. Because if you look at a computer or a cell phone today and compare it to 10 years ago, it's not the same thing. You have to adjust it for what you actually buy. Because there are all sorts of things happening inside it, buying, getting much more. And you also have to adjust it for how many hours you need to work in order to buy a cell phone, for example. And if you do these sort of things, you will find out that just about all prices collapse, especially things that are manufactured, stuff that you can touch, things that are produced on farms, things that are produced in factories. All those prices basically collapsed. And we are entering a period of amazing abundance. But not all prices are coming down. Certain prices remain more or less the same, and some prices are actually going up. And the prices, and it's very difficult to really compare it over time, but some of the prices that are going up, and in fact most of the prices are going up, are prices that are associated with services of one way or the other. Like, for example, medical service prices, medicine prices are going up, or the price of education is going up, or looking after old people is becoming more expensive. So that tells us something else about how economies work today. Now, if you go back in South Africa 100 years, for example, 100 years ago, approximately 80% of the South African, and it's all in prices. You can see everything, all of this in prices. They are just amazing. 100 years ago, about 80% of what we produce in South Africa was manufactured, was produced, and what economists call the primary industries. The primary industries are things like, for example, agriculture and mining and stuff like that. Today, the primary industries are far less than 20%, Well, the biggest chunk of the South African economy, in fact, the rich economies today, in the case of the US, the biggest chunk of economies or economic activity happens today in the service industry. So I just told you that stuff that are manufactured on farms, in factories and stuff like that, they are getting cheaper, but services and certain kinds of services are becoming more expensive. Now, that tells us a lot about the economy, and it tells us a lot the way that we should and can manage and should be able to manage the economy. So today, if you look at more economic activities are mostly service-orientated. It's driven by people doing some kind of service. It is not, and this is how our politicians are so extremely wrong, it's not about the land, but it's what you do with the land that matters. And there are a couple of industries that I particularly like. Just by the way, you can think of any job, any job that you can think of, you will find that job in an industry called agriculture. And in fact, all industries today are mostly service-orientated and service-driven kind of industries. So, if you ask our president, for example, he just told us it's a good idea to create small farmers. It's a good idea to redistribute the land. It's about the land. They are so extremely wrong because that's not where the economies are today. Economies are happening in the cloud, and economies are service-orientated today. There are 4 industries that I particularly like. Obviously, agriculture is one of those, because of all the changes that's happening in agriculture. And it's also a service industry. The value add happens in labs, at universities, and drone pilots and geneticists. That's where the value add happens in agriculture. So I really like agriculture. That's one. The other one, obviously, is medicine. Let's call it personalized medicine or health services. There are amazing investment opportunities in that specific industry. The third one that I like is education. The prices of education is also going up. That's an industry that I really like to invest in. And the fourth one is the one in which I am, and that is finance. And I want to talk a little bit more about this industry called finance. Now, all sort of things are happening in finance. But one thing that I absolutely love, and that's part of finance, I guess, is money. Money is the most amazing discovery, or one of the most amazing discoveries of all times. And money evolved over time. And as money evolved over time, whenever there's a new form of money taking over, you see this increase in economic activities. So that is happening at the moment. And there's something big coming. We know the blockchain technology. Now, I'm not going to go too much into Bitcoin, for example. But the same technology can basically be used to create something called central bank digital currencies. And that's the big thing. Central bank digital currencies, and many central banks are looking at it. In fact, it's already in use, central bank digital currencies. The difference between a central bank digital currency and, say, for example, Bitcoin, is that the central bank digital currency is programmable. And that means that whatever you use your wallet for, if you go around the corner previously to buy a Zol, you can do it, nobody can see that. But this time around, everybody will be able to see what you're going to do. So it will be impossible to hide anything. It will be impossible to evade any form of taxes. So today you can exactly see what you are doing. But it also means that whoever issues the central bank digital currency can use this as a tool to control you. And it is already happening, by the way. In the case of China, if you say some bad things about government, then you can't buy a train ticket, for example. Imagine the central bank digital currency in the hands of an organization like, for example, the ANC. What they're going to do. This is Big Brother on steroids, by the way. And it's a reality. There's a new thing happening in the world of money. And it's already happening. And that's why I encourage people to get used to this technology and know what's going on, to understand this kind of technology. And this new thing is called stable coins. There are various different kind of coins. You get Bitcoin and alternative coins, and you get meme coins, and you get shit coins, and you get things like, for example, stable coins. But essentially what a stable coin is, you give your money to somebody, he will take the money and he will put it in a bank account or in something else, and he will earn an interest on that, and he will give you a coin. And this coin will be on your phone, and you will use this coin because as a payment, it's much cheaper and much easier to use a stable coin. So I can send it anywhere in the world, and nobody can stop me. It's easy to do it. Transaction cost is very, very low. But think about the implications about this. There are huge danger in this as well because it's happened already. And by the way, The genius act of Donald Trump is exactly the idea behind that is to regulate this. But imagine somebody takes all these billions of dollars and they're doing that already, increasing the demand for treasury bills in the United States. So they're buying, take your dollars, buy treasury bills, for example, get a nice return of 3 or 4% or so, risk-free for them, and they give you a stable coin, and the stable coin you can use for whatever. But what if the money is not there anymore? And that can lead to a run on a bank. So the financial system can potentially come under threat as well if these stable coins, which are becoming more and more popular, if it's not properly managed. That's not all. Say, for example, we decide to use dollar stable coins in South Africa because it's much easier and much cheaper. Then we can eventually, why should we use the rand? Now there are some philosophical questions like, we already do not have a police force or an army in South Africa. We've got a geographic area, but if you lose your money, do you still have a country, for example? And remember, in the meantime, things are happening in the cloud more and more and more. So those are the kind of questions that we need to ask about the future of economies. And I'm actually quite excited about all these sort of things and what it's going to look like in future. Do our politicians understand this? Do they understand that the world of the economy today is not what it used to be? And I'm afraid not. If you look at the ANC, for example, there are 4 things that the ANC stand for. First of all, their ideology is somewhere stuck in the 1920s. Their ideology is based on Karl Marx's labor value theory, where those bad capitalists take the surplus value that's created by labor. That does not apply anymore because people do not work in factories anymore. In factories today are robots and computers working there. The people that work in factories today are highly skilled IT specialists or engineers or artificial intelligence people, not normal blue-collar workers anymore. And there's where Donald Trump is wrong, just by the way, because nobody wants to work in a factory. In factories today, and that's the reason why prices keep on going on. So the ANC's got stuck somewhere in the 1920s. They still believe in Karl Marx's ideas and his philosophies. That's the one thing that the ANC stand for. Flowing from their ideologies, of course, their various policies. And the policies fit in with these ideologies. And the policies are things like, for example, expropriation and centralization of just about everything. They even call one another childish names like comrade, for example. The last time I called somebody comrade was in grade 3 when we had the Soaring Eagles as a game. So that's the second thing that the ANC fit. The third thing that the ANC stand for is that they stand for cadre deployment. And another word for cadre deployment is incompetence. Because you employ people because they are loyal to the party, not because they can do the job. And the fourth thing that the ANC quite often stand for is that the ANC stands for corruption. Now, the result of all of that is what we have today in South Africa. I'm going to get back to that just now. I just want to walk around the world quickly. I know I've got 20 minutes. I don't know how many minutes I have left, but I just want to touch on one or two things, and maybe there will be questions out of the audience about that a little bit later. Just on a couple of countries. In Russia, it's unlikely, if there's a ceasefire, it's unlikely to last. I think Putin's got much bigger ideas. He wants to cut off Ukraine completely from the Black Sea, if there are questions on that. The Russian economy likely to go on doing quite well in the short term, but within a year or two, the Russian economy is likely to tank. Chinese economy doing surprisingly well. I don't think it's going to last. They've got an overcapacity problem, and that's leading to very low prices. There's a potential world war waiting to happen, especially around Taiwan, depending how Donald Trump is going to react to that. The European economies are dead in the water, basically, because they're old, but they're rich. There's a bit of an increase in economic activity, mostly because of the Germans spending more money on a military effort, but the Europeans are not doing well. The populations are getting much smaller as well. The super economy remains the United States. The US economy just keeps on roaring ahead. They're doing very, very well, likely to keep on doing so. There are signs of a slowdown in economic activity, and I do think that the Federal Reserve will start cutting interest rates quite aggressively, not only because of politics, but because the macroeconomic, the inflationary environment actually calls for a further cut in interest rates. That will make it easier for countries like South Africa to cut rates as well. The US dollar is the world's most important reserve currency. It will remain the world's most important reserve currency for a long time. There are many reasons for that. The most single important reason is because the US capital market is by far the biggest, the most liquid out there. And if you want to rival the US dollar's status as the world's most important reserve currency, you must have a capital market, and nobody's got that. The closest are the Europeans, but they've got a fragmented capital market. So that's it. The dollar is going to remain for a long time. Donald Trump can relax. The BRICS countries are not going to create their own reserve currency. Come back to South Africa. I just told you what the ANC stands for. Now let's see what they've done. The ANC has all but destroyed some major and very important institutions in South Africa. The local authorities are probably the single most important authority out there. And the local authorities, more than 70% of them got qualified orders. So the local authorities, you don't know anything. You guys coming from the Cape, you don't know anything about what can be done to local authorities. We've destroyed it. I mean, it looks like those places have been in war. They implode, or in the case of Johannesburg, explode, quite literally. And the local authorities are crucially important for business. They have the outstanding debt of the local authorities to Eskom currently, Andre, is approximately 100 billion rand at the moment, and nearly double where it was a year ago, despite the efforts of the Minister of Finance. The state-owned enterprises, the same goes for them. The Eskom outstanding debt, a couple of 100 billion, I think currently is about 350 billion. Transnet, huge outstanding debt. The same goes for just about everything. The state-owned enterprises have been destroyed. There are some signs of improvement, the Eskom's management, Andre, and some improvement on Transnet as well. It seems to me, especially Michelle Phillips trying to get some private sector participation. I listened to the Deputy Minister of Finance yesterday, and he told us is that it's the ANC that allowed the private sector to participate in the electricity market and to participate in the railroads and stuff like that, and they should get all the credit for that. The reality is, however, it is the ANC that destroyed the state-owned enterprises, all but destroyed the state. The post office is just disappearing. It's just dying. The same goes for the national accounts that the Minister of Finance is responsible for. Now, we can't compare this sort of numbers over time. If you go back 10, 15 years or so ago, local authorities washed their own faces, they had their own revenue. Financially, they will did not too badly. The same goes for the state-owned enterprises, not mostly. But those institutions have all been destroyed, and they are knocking on the door of the Minister of Finance and say, listen, we also want some money. So actually what we need to do, if we really want to compare the finances of the state over time, we have to include all those state-owned enterprises, and I call them the parasitals, with the local authorities to get an actual picture of what's going on. So, for instance, we know that the debt to GDP ratio today, I'm talking about national government debt to GDP ratio, is about 77% to GDP. But the actual number is, if you include the local authorities and state-owned enterprises, about 85% to GDP. 85%. And rising at a rate of 2 or 3% relative to GDP every year. The national accounts, we are heading for a financial crisis in South Africa, because I've told you the debt levels where it is. The debt levels, if you include the state-owned enterprises, are running probably around about 6.5 trillion rand in South Africa, which means each one of you owe more than 100,000 rand more than what you think you owe, because that's a per capita debt to GDP in South Africa. What the Minister of Finance also done, remember, it's all good and well if you borrow money and to invest in capital. I always tell my students, it's okay if you go to the bank, borrow money to build a new room for a new baby, that's fine. But if you go to the bank, borrow money to go to Mauritius to make the baby, that's not good. And that's what we're doing. We are borrowing long-term money. And the Minister of Finance is spending that in short-term current expenditure, essentially destroying capital in South Africa. The capital formation in South Africa is approximately about 15% of GDP, or less than that actually. We need to increase that to about 25%. And actually the Minister of Finance, by his destruction of capital, is reducing that. The state is the biggest destroyer of capital in South Africa. So we've got low levels of savings, and a large chunk of that is actually destroyed. Now I can go through all the numbers and tell you what's been happening on the numbers, and I haven't got a clue what my time looks like. For 3 minutes left. But just a few things. On the expenditure side, there are close to about 20 million people. Now I'm lying to you. There are about 30 million people receiving an income from the state every month out of a population of 65 million people. Every month. I can tell you on the revenue side, they are the biggest revenue source to the Minister of Finance. 40% of total revenue is personal income taxes, and there are a small number of individuals paying just about all of that. The third most important revenue source is company taxes. There are 1,000 companies that pay more than 75% of total company taxes in South Africa. So on both those two major taxes, we are over the so-called Laffer curve, which means if you increase that further, you're actually going to collect less of that, just by the way. The only tax that we can potentially increase is value-added tax. But of course, politically, that is very difficult to do. So the state finances are in very deep trouble, and we are heading for a financial crisis. What is that going to look like? Of this, about 6.5 trillion, government numbers is close to 6, the central government numbers is about 6 trillion, about 70% of GDP. 20% of the rand-denominated bonds are funded by foreigners, and they are mostly Americans and Europeans. But what has been happening recently is that the banks, the South African banks, have been starting to accumulate more government bonds. So much so that the Reserve Bank is getting concerned about that. And the Reserve Bank indicated about 2 years ago already that they are getting a little bit concerned about the banks taking on too much government debt. I just want to make a very clear point here, in that the South African banks are very healthy, well capitalized, and perhaps too protected, but the Reserve Bank is doing an excellent job. But the Reserve Bank did indicate they're getting a little bit uncomfortable with the levels of debt that the South African banks are holding of government debt. Now imagine the following scenario. So I'm telling you, we're heading for a financial crisis. We're heading the following scenario, and that is Donald Trump gets up one morning and he's not in a good mood, and he tells his asset managers that they're not allowed to buy South African bonds anymore, and they start selling the South African bonds. Now, the South African bonds are currently trading, the 10-year bonds at about 10% or so. Inflation, let's call it 3% or so, which give you a real return of approximately 7%. So, if you're a foreigner, you sit in America, and you're a young bond trader, you have a currency that is extremely cheap. So the interest into South Africa is very cheap. You have a very liquid market, and you have a very, very juicy yield, very high yield that you can get. Obviously, you're going to buy this. But unfortunately, the opposite is also true. When something goes wrong, they can start selling those bonds. Long yields go up, the rand goes to pot, short-term interest rates go up, and the South African economy goes in a further decline or the further nosedive. So that is a potential scenario, and that's something that I'm very, very concerned about. We have to cut back on the debt to GDP ratio. We can't do that by spending less. That's politically just not possible. Of course, we can cut back on rats and mice and reduce the cabinet and so on, but that's not where the big money goes. The big money goes to education and welfare services, and very importantly, to interest on state debt. We can't really cut back on state expenditure. There's only one way that we can fix the debt to GDP ratio, and that is through economic growth. There's nothing else. And I know what the secret to economic growth is. There are 3 things that you need to do. You must protect private property rights. You must, and with that I mean the very broad definition of private property rights. The right to my life, the right to movement and stuff like that. Secondly, you must protect and you must encourage free trade. You don't need a PhD in economics to understand this sort of stuff. There's a saying that there's no free lunch, but there's one exception, very important exception, and that is free trade. Think about this. If 2 economic agents trade with one another, both the buyer and the seller gain from this transaction, because otherwise the transaction would not have happened. And you can only trade freely if you own the stuff. That's why the protection of private property rights are so important. The third thing has to do with prices, sound money. You do that, you do those 3 things, and I guarantee you, your economy is going to grow. There are some things happening quite well. I just want to touch on the Reserve Bank. I think the Reserve Bank, there's space for another cut, say 25 bips or so. Lesetja Kanyako has been doing an excellent job. Lesetja Kanyako actually unilaterally decided to reduce the inflation targets to 3%. The Minister of Finance doesn't want to do. He was very angry at Lesetja Kanyako cutting the inflation targets to 3%, basically, because, and he's right, it's his prerogative. Minister of Finance can reduce the inflation targets. So why is he not doing that? Why is he not reducing the inflation targets? And the reason is because he knows if you reduce inflation target to 3% and Eskom goes for another 12% increase in electricity prices, or the local authorities where their ridiculous increases, the spotlight on them are going to be this big. And also, the Minister of Finance is budgeting for every year for the next couple of years, 4.5% increase in state expenditure, another real increase in state expenditure, which means then that the Minister of Finance himself will need to start cutting back on state expenditure. And that, of course, is politically not very easy to do. So how can we fix South Africa? And I can give you a list of things. It's not difficult to fix South Africa. Most economists can tell you, and I think I would go for something easy to start off with by cleaning the place up, for example. But the reality is that this list of things that we need to do in order to fix the country is really not relevant, because they're not going to listen. The ANC is not going to listen. The real ideology of the ANC is we line our pockets. That's the ideology of the ANC. And the only way that we can fix South Africa is to get rid of the ANC. And the time has come. We did it before. We fixed our political problems previously, and we can do it again. Maybe just one or two things, and I just want to, again, on Magnus. You're actually wrong, Magnus, how much money you can take out of the country. Imagine I go to Luno, and I can buy 100 million rands worth of Bitcoin. I can do that. And I convert my Bitcoins into stable coins, US stable coins, then I can take out as much as I like. Nobody can stop me. Because of technological changes, foreign exchange regulations, capital controls have become irrelevant. And things are happening in the cloud. And politicians that used to control us, I've got news for them. They can't control us the way they used to, because things are happening in the cloud more and more so. And I think the time has come for us and for politicians to understand and to realize this. And I've got all the confidence in South Africans to fix our political problems. And next year will be another opportunity. And just a last comment. Please don't break any laws. Stick to within whatever you need to do. But pay as little tax as possible. Thank you very much for listening to me.
This BizNews production is brought to you by Brenthurst Wealth, South Africa's leading boutique wealth manager, trusted to guide families for over 20 years. Invest better with Brenthurst.